In this video, I'm going to show you how we can configure EIGRP stub router feature for redistributed networks. Actually, here we have a simple scenario like the previous video, but also I added one OSPF routing domain here. And in the router 3 and router 4, the spoke routers, I will redistribute the networks learned from the OSPF into EIGRP. When you configure EIGRP stub feature, as you know, by default, the router 3 and router 4, the spoke routers, should advertise only the connected and also summary networks. Because of that, the routes learned from the OSPF don't advertise to the router 1 and router 2. I will show you how you can actually advertise or send redistributed networks learned from OSPF routing domain or any other routing domain in EIGRP stub. Let me to show you. It is so easy. First, here in the router 1, let me to show you that we have neighborship with router 3 and router 4 with the show IP EIGRP neighbors. As you can see, we have neighborship with both router 3 and router 4, and also in the router 2, the next hub router, show IP EIGRP neighbor can show us we have neighborship with router 3 and router 4. Again, I configured router 3 with the classic EIGRP configuration and router 4 with the named EIGRP configuration. In the router 3, as you can see here, we have OSPF neighborship with the router 5. Show IP OSPF neighbor can show us that we have neighborship with the router 5. And also in the router 4, let me to show you that we have neighborship with router 5, show IP OSPF neighbor. And also in both router 3 and router 4, we learn quad 5/32 from the OSPF, show IP route OSPF. It can show us that we learn quad 5/32 from the OSPF in router 3 and also in the router 4, show IP route OSPF. As you can see, we learn quad 5/32 from the OSPF. First, let me to configure the router 3 and router 4 as EIGRP stub routers. Router EIGRP1 in the router 3, EIGRP stub. And then in the router 4, let me to show you in the router 4, I want to configure the similar feature, router EIGRP lab, and then address family, for example, IPv4 unicast AS number 1, EIGRP stub. Now, both router 3 and router 4 are stub routers. Because of that, in the router 1, if you check again the show IP route, this is the show IP route, EIGRP, you will see that the router 1 learned only the 10.230/24 and 10.240/24. Actually, these two connected network from the router 3 and router 4. As you know, in the EIGRP stub default status, only connected and summary network should advertise with stub routers. Because of that, R3 only can advertise the 10.230/24, the link between router 2 and router 3 to router 1, and the router 4 should advertise only 10.240/24 to router 1. Because of that, here we have only these two networks. And also in the router 2, we have similar condition, show IP route EIGRP. As you can see, again here we have only 10.1.30/24, the link 1 and the link between router 1 and router 3, and also the link 10.140/4, the link between router 1 and router 4. Now let me to configure redistribution from OSPF to EIGRP in both router 3 and router 4. In the router 3, I will use redistribute OSPF1 with metric parameters. For example, here it is not important for this scenario. This is redistribution command. Redistribute OSPF1 with metric 10,000. And after that, for example, here you know that first you should define the bandwidth and then delay and some other parameters. If you want, you can use question mark. For example, for delay you can use 10, and after that EIGRP reliability 255, and then for example load is 1, and finally MTU or any other values. The values is not important. And also in the router 4, let me to go to the topology base, and then we can use redistribute command, redistribute OSPF1 with the metric, for example, again 10,000, and then 10, 255, 1, 1,500. Okay, and then actually we configure the distribution, and we expect that router 3 and router 4 should advertise the OSPF networks to the R1 and R2. Let me to show you. Now we expect to not see these networks. Why? Because we didn't configure a EIGRP stop feature for advertising the redistributed networks. Look at here, we don't have any difference. And also in the router 2, again, we don't have any difference. Now let me to configure EIGRP to advertise EIGRP stop feature to advertise only the redistributed networks. First, let me to remove the previous command, no EIGRP stop. Now we don't have any stop feature in the router 3, and after that EIGRP stop redistributed. That's it. It means that you are a stub router, and also you should advertise only redistributed network to for example, to the neighbors. And after that, in the router 4 also, let me to use no EIGRP stop, and after that EIGRP stop redistributed. That's it. Okay, redistributed. And after that, in the router 1, you can check again the routing table learned from the EIGRP, show IP route EIGRP. As you can see, we learned quad 5/32 from both router 3 and router 4. And also these two network, the 10350/24, the link between router 3 and router 5, and 10450/24, the link between router 4 and router 5 from both router 3 and router 4. And this is the EIGRP stub redistributed feature. Also in the router 2, we have similar condition, show IP route EIGRP. And then in the, for example, router 1, if you check show IP EIGRP neighbor detail, you will see that here we have these networks, actually we have these pairs, a stop pair advertising redistributed routes, and here again a stop pair advertising redistributed routes. Also in the router 2, we have similar conditions, show IP EIGRP neighbor detail. Because of that, now we know how we can configure EIGRP stub router with redistributed option.